In a small village nestled among rolling hills, lived a widow named Miriam. After the loss of her husband, her life had taken a turn for the worse. With two young sons to care for, the burdens of grief and financial distress weighed heavily on her shoulders. Deeper than the sorrow of losing her partner was the looming threat of debt that had been left behind. The creditors were relentless, and Miriam feared they would take her sons as payment for the debts incurred. One fateful day, overwhelmed by despair, Miriam decided to seek help. Remembering the stories she had heard about the prophet Elisha, known for his miraculous deeds, she gathered her courage and went to him. Approaching the prophet with tears in her eyes, she said, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and now the creditor is coming to take my two sons as his slaves." Elisha, looking at her with deep compassion, asked gently, "What do you have in your house?" Miriam sighed, feeling defeated. "Your maidservant has nothing but a jar of oil," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Go," Elisha instructed. "Borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors' empty vessels. Do not gather just a few. And when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons. Then pour it into all those vessels, and set aside the full ones." Though puzzled by his instructions, Miriam chose to trust Elisha. She hurriedly went to her neighbors, knocking on doors and asking for empty vessels. Surprised yet supportive, her neighbors lent her whatever they could find. Jars, bowls, and containers of all sizes filled her home. Her sons, eager to assist, helped collect the vessels, filled with excitement and anticipation. Once back at home, Miriam shut the door tight, as Elisha instructed. With trembling hands, she took the small jar of oil and began pouring it into the first vessel. To her astonishment, the oil flowed freely from the jar, filling the first vessel and then the next. "Bring me another vessel," she called to her sons, and they rushed to bring another. Each time a new vessel was presented, Miriam poured, and the oil kept flowing. She watched in amazement as each vessel filled to the brim. As the last vessel was filled, Miriam turned to her sons and asked, "Bring me another vessel." They replied, "There are no more vessels." At that moment, the oil ceased to flow, leaving them with an incredible collection of full jars. Miriam's heart swelled with gratitude and disbelief. What does this mean? She wondered. She gathered her thoughts and rushed back to Elisha, holding the filled jars tightly. "Look, I have filled all the vessels as you told me," she exclaimed, her voice filled with joy. Elisha smiled warmly and said, "Now go, sell the oil and pay your debt. You and your sons can live on the rest." With newfound hope, Miriam hurried to the market. Selling the oil, she was able to pay off her debts entirely. What once seemed like a bleak and hopeless future now appeared bright and filled with possibility. She returned home with enough money to care for her sons and to start anew, grateful for the provision that had come from her faith. As time passed, news of Miriam's miraculous story spread throughout the village. People began to gather, eager to hear about the widow, who turned a small jar of oil into a means of salvation. She shared not only the details of the miracle, but also the importance of faith and trust in God's provision. Her story inspired other villagers, reigniting a sense of hope and community among them. Miriam became a beacon of encouragement, teaching others that even the smallest acts of faith could yield extraordinary results. "Sometimes, the answers we seek come from within," she would say. "It is in our moments of desperation that we discover our true strength." The villagers began to reflect on their own lives, realizing they, too, had dreams and hopes that could flourish if they allowed faith to lead the way. They started to plant gardens, nurture their passions, and support one another in their pursuits. Miriam's story fueled a movement of encouragement, reminding everyone that, like the mustard seed, even the smallest beginnings could grow into something magnificent. As the village prospered, the bonds among the people strengthened. They formed support networks to help one another in times of need. Inspired by Miriam's experience, together, they celebrated not just the successes, but the journey it took to reach them. Years later, when Miriam looked back on her life, she marveled at how a simple act, planting one little seed, had transformed her family, her community, and her destiny. The story of the pot of oil had become a cherished tale in the village, a reminder that faith could blossom even in the direst circumstances. The village was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a community bound by shared experiences, dreams, and a collective strength that came from believing in one another. As seasons changed, the gardens flourished, just like the residents' spirits. New families moved to the village, many drawn by the transformative story of Miriam and the miraculous pot of oil. They brought their own hopes and dreams, ready to plant their seeds in the fertile ground of faith. Miriam often gathered the villagers by her garden, sharing her wisdom and encouraging them to continue nurturing not just plants, but also the dreams and aspirations that lay within each of them. She taught them about patience, perseverance, and the importance of believing in what they couldn't yet see. In her garden, they found a sanctuary of hope where they could come together, reflect, and support one another. Then one day, as she tended to her garden, she noticed something unexpected. A young girl from the village sat quietly at the edge, watching her with wide eyes. She looked timid, and her hands clutched a small, empty jar. "What's on your mind, dear?" Miriam asked her gently. I want to grow something too. But I don't have any seeds," the girl replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Miriam smiled warmly and knelt beside her. "You don't need much to start. Here, take this." She handed the girl a small packet of seeds from her own garden. "Plant these with patience and care, and believe that they will grow." The girl's face lit up with joy as she accepted the seeds. In that moment, Miriam realized that her journey wasn't just about her own faith. It was about inspiring others to cultivate hope and dreams. She had become a nurturer of not just plants, but of potential and possibilities. As the young girl planted her seeds, Miriam gathered the village once more, telling them this new story of hope. The cycle of planting and growing continued, not just in the garden, but within the hearts of every villager. They began to understand that life was about the seeds they chose to sow, whether in their gardens, in their relationships, or in their dreams. Years passed, and Miriam's garden became a well-known landmark in the village, symbolizing hope and resilience. The once struggling widow had become a mentor to many, guiding them through their own life challenges with the lessons she had learned from a simple pot of oil. Her story served as a testament to the power of faith, reminding everyone that no act of kindness or belief was too small. And as the village thrived, it became a place where dreams blossomed, nourished by the belief that even the smallest seed could create a legacy that would last for generations to come. In the end, Miriam knew that the true miracle wasn't just in the oil or the crops that grew, but in the unbreakable bonds of community, the warmth of connection, and the enduring strength of faith that they had all cultivated together.